This is a book club. We're going to drink some alcohol. We're going to talk about some books. We're going to get a little petty. Guests today are Morgan Jerkins, Josh Gondelman, and Elizabeth Acevedo. Welcome to my book club, where we're going to be discussing Jackie Woodson's Red at the Bone. I loved her previous adult novel, Another Brooklyn, and I really wanted to see what she would do next in this space because she's primarily known as a YA writer. And I definitely wanted to feature a book from a Black woman, and she did not disappoint. It's an imperfect book, but I really enjoyed it. It focuses on a mother and a daughter with a non-traditional relationship moving across time. How would you describe this book?
An intergenerational story of dreams and ambitions.
Family history, how that impacts people for better and worse.
Definitions of womanhood, or like self-definitions of womanhood.
The obligation.
Family.
Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Brooklyn a theme, Brooklyn.
Everything she writes is a love letter to Brooklyn. Yes. I have never seen someone so down for her borough in my life.
And it's so much different Brooklyn, right? Like the difference between Bushwick in the 90s and Park Slope in the 90s is so striking and specific. And it's not just like, Brooklyn, the notorious B.I.G. I'm walking over here. You know what I mean? It's not broad strokes. It's like granular neighborhood to neighborhood and park to park. And that's like so special and comes from a place of like real intimacy and knowledge.
And she writes about Black Brooklyn.
Right.
Because so much of the contemporary narrative around Brooklyn is about gentrification. And understandably, but few people talk about the Blackness of Brooklyn, that there are Black and brown people in this community and there always have been, and it's the white people who are pushing them out of their homes. And so to see her focus on Black Brooklyn exclusively was really wonderful. What did you guys think overall of this book?
I think for me, the word that kept coming to mind was stunning. Like, stunning and lovely. Like, there was just a progression of language and of images that just felt like Jackie writes beautifully.
I was gonna say fluid, but I love how the voices were in conversation with one another, even if they weren't directly speaking to each other.
Right.
I also loved, I felt a different feeling like every 2 pages in a good way, not in a way that I felt jerked around, but just like, oh, this tenderness inside me, where is this coming from? And it was just like so beautifully evocative of all this breadth of emotion. I thought was really impressive and really joyful and wonderful.
I love the word tender.
I was wondering what you guys thought about the level of characterization and the multiple points of view and whether or not that worked.
One thing that I liked about it is when you saw the different characters from each other's points of view, that you kind of got a more rounded perspective than you get just in a straight first person or even like a third person that focuses on one character. So like I really liked that you get Iris choosing herself and not walking into what her mother expected of her. And I like that you got like, oh, this doesn't benefit everybody equally, right? This is like, you're choosing yourself sometimes at the expense of others.
I think I was really invested in the perspectives that were the women's perspectives. And even with the epigraph we get at the beginning, like this is for the ancestors, I feel like Woodson was trying to create this lineage throughout. For me, the men felt like vehicles to get to know the women characters. Like it was less about their stories and more about, look at what my eye can see that tells you something about her you didn't know. Because Aubrey's mother to me was fascinating.
Yes.
And she's not a central
I wanted a
character.
whole book about her.
When we learned that she was tutoring Iris at one point, I'm like, what was
To
happening
make Iris's
there?
life possible, like she understood like that a young woman needs an education.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that motherhood might not fit you the way you think it's gonna fit onto you. And so I'm gonna give you this alternative route, like that his mother saw that. There were just so many moments that I think the men did that. Like their eye allowed me to see those women differently, but it was still about the women.
Yeah, it's interesting. For the last book, we read Colson Whitehead's The Nickel Boys. And one of the things I thought was that the women characters were underdeveloped. And here it was the men that were underdeveloped, but in service of the women.
Right.
Which was a great choice.
I agree.
I think anything in service of women is good.
I agree.
Yeah. I also like the...
I also agree.
Just in case.
I realized I hadn't said it out loud and I didn't want anything like,
I felt
he's
you
holding
thinking
back.
it.
Yeah. Thank you. I was leaving it.
I really liked how Jackie writes about socioeconomic class pertaining to Aubrey's mother when she was like, I don't want him scrubbing any floors. And there was like a line about hands. And I was like, oh yeah, like she was doing all of this work to make sure that their lives would be better, you know? And I even thought her life was sort of cut off short. I mean, she didn't die at like 16 or 20 years old, but I was like, she still felt like she had more life left. So when you said about how you could read more about her, I was like, I could have as well.
There's a lot of restraint in this book, right? Like even like all we get from Aubrey's mother is like the system.
Yep.
And we never quite hear what happened in the system, but we know what happened in the system. Even when I was 11, like my father, and then we just have to know what happened there. Like there's this moment of where she gives you just enough and then pulls all the way back. Like either you figured it out or you didn't.
Oh, yeah.
And that's on you.
She trusts the reader quite a lot. And I love when a writer trusts the reader. I don't need to be over-explained. And I think more writers should give readers the opportunity to do some of that critical thinking. And she forces you to figure out a lot of the plot.
Like I had to reread the first paragraph. Like, was there a page that I missed? Because it starts with but.
I love
but that
though.
afternoon, and I'm like, what about the previous afternoon, right? And there's leaps in time. And one day when Iris was at the window, she was 50 years old, waiting to go to the park, and I'm like, wait, we were just in this other moment, and she's like, you gotta catch up.
Yes.
With time, all the time, you gotta catch up. And now we're going back. I'm like, oh, you really trust us.
Not only that, she went before the beginning of the novel. Like she went back.
Right.
And
before the cotillion.
Yes.
Right.
And then back.
And then back.
Yeah.
Ancestrally, though, I think, again, that call to, like, what are the stories that weren't written down to, like, same? Is that how
Yeah, I love but that afternoon because I was like, oh, we're already disagreeing with something from the first word. So I found that to be like, there's like real tension there that's present in word one where you're like, but I haven't even sat down yet.
Yeah. And there was actually so much tension in that first chapter.
Yeah.
Because we learned that Melody doesn't call her mom mom, she calls her Iris. And already you're just like, what's going on there?
She's like, you can say sex. Like even that moment with the mother daughter, I'm like, oh, there's an interesting, like you were saying, like conservatism from the child here that I didn't expect a teen to have.
And then you get, even in the first chapter, you get like, you could have been an abortion.
Yes.
It's like, wow, we've really hit the ground running. We aren't like,
we're not wasting any
words
time.
or wasting time.
And you get that moment, like, don't fall in love with the grandparents. Like, don't fall in love with any of these characters because there are things you don't know. And we get that in the very first chapter of like, they had a different suggestion for you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We haven't even met them yet, and we're like, oh,
Her
wow.
religious grandparents had that. So like,
Right.
that's like a very strong.
But I feel so bad for her. It's like she's being treated like an aberration, but if it were not for her, Melody would not even be in this world. So it felt like when I first was reading it, it felt like the grandparents were just hopping a generation on. We're like, okay, forget about you. Now we're on to you now. And there was a lot of thick tension.
And they brought it up several times that certain things skipped a generation.
Yeah, I was
Yes.
like, ouch.
And I was like, damn,
I know.
Iris, you're putting a lot on Iris's shoulders.
Right.
Like, let her live.
Right.
She did the right thing. I mean, I think there's nothing worse than someone who doesn't want to parent being forced to parent.
Right.
Yeah.
Because they take it out on the child. And Melody clearly grew up completely loved. She had an active and present father. And she did know who her mother was, where her mother was.
Right.
Iris wasn't there, but she was there.
Yeah. And then it says it very early on, like, I did the work. Like, I brought you here, and then I gave you over to the, I gave you over to your father, the person who wanted to be here. And like that passing on, and that was probably halfway through the book. So
I
you
know.
like, she's already made that decision early on.
Especially when you see how painful her labor is. I love the connection that she deliberately makes the choice because her labor was so awful. And she's like, you know what, I've done my time.
I did the work.
I did.
I did
one
the
night,
work.
we're good. But
Man.
that's one long ass night. So
Yeah.
I'm just like, sister, you're right. You're good.
Let's talk about
I was feeling Jam.
I
But
was
then
feeling Jam
Jam did
too.
Iris wrong.
But then Jam was just out here.
But
Like,
I was
love
confused.
her.
Wait a minute, because I was like, so Iris knows she can't be with Jam in public. So I was like, okay, so what is Jam is supposed to do? Like, if you see that there's no future, I don't know. I didn't feel. I wasn't.
I think Iris would have come around though.
Right, I was saying that seems
'Cause
unclear.
I was just like, I wasn't.
There were
so mad at Jam.
conversations that had to be
This
had.
was the early 90s. It was a different time, I must say, as someone who was out in the early 90s. It was a different time.
But that is-
it wasn't like the 50s.
Well, yeah.
You can't just get a stomach rub on the lawn. Like, you can't do
Right.
that. Especially after we just had this really tense moment where I'm really vulnerable. You learn this thing about me, and now you just And it's like, oh, you good? We good?
we-
Like,
Right.
no,
Like,
we are not good.
Absolutely awesome.
We're not good. You better take your Timberlands and fucking walk away.
Yeah.
That's
We are
what.
not good.
That was so cinematic when she did that. I was like, whoa, okay.
And she's the only one at this school who knows this secret,
This
right?
thing.
Yes.
Which she had been keeping even from her intimately for 6 months. So they have this huge thing between them in addition to their romantic relationship that she's just like out in the world with, which is so terrifying when you break up with someone and you're like,
You know
well,
this thing.
please don't share that with
Yeah, and
everyone.
it's funny because my mom was telling me the other day that your worst enemy can be your partner because they know too much about you. And then she said, men talk too much.
Oh, man.
And I was just like, damn. Every once in a while, she just drops some wild shit on me. And I was thinking about that in that circumstance where now, even though Jam is a woman, like she was her partner and she now knew this really deeply intimate thing about Iris. And I actually was just so surprised that was a make or break thing. It's like, Iris, all she did was not tell you she has a daughter. It's not the end of the world.
I know, it's like, but I think that Jan was a little bit pompous because I love how Jackie talked about her background, the daughter of atheist professors, like really steeped in Black feminist thought. And I'm like, she has a sensitivity chip missing. Like she literally opened up to you like, this is not my sister, this is my daughter. And the way she responded, I'll concede to your point. I was like, that's kind of mean and like cold. She didn't grow up the same way as you. Like,
But I wonder if we also just don't know enough about their relationship. Like Jan might have been like, you are one of many women who I'm dating. And we don't know if it's just because Iris, this was the first person Iris opens up to in this way, like really loved, that she thought this was something different. And so Jan might have been like, you kept a secret from me and like, I'm good. But it might have not been as deep as we thought. And I felt like there was an alluding to like, because Jan thought she was the one who was like, oh, I'm sorry I haven't been around, I've been busy.
yeah.
Yeah.
It
No-
wasn't
no
a blame here,
no.
like you didn't tell me a secret. It was like, oh no, I know I've been acting up.
Yep.
Which made it
I'm
like,
sorry, I
oh.
moved on to the next woman in my rotation.
Right.
It was just
It made it seem like there was a disconnect of what they
that they
thought
were in
happened.
two different relationships.
There was a
Right,
disconnect.
right.
Clearly,
They were, for
Iris was
sure.
in love and Jam was in lust.
Right.
And
Right.
But that's the Iris
unfortunate.
Aubrey relationship too, right?
Yes.
But
Yeah.
inverted.
In reverse.
Where like
Yeah.
Aubrey was like, I can't, and it was stated over and over again, right?
Yeah.
Aubrey can't bear to think that Iris would be with someone else at college.
Right.
Iris can't bear to think of who Jam might be with.
Right.
when they're
Yes.
together.
True.
And it's like that
painful.
flipped it. Which
It was
really hurt.
painful.
Yeah.
And there was so much disconnect because Iris was clearly in love with Jam, but then was like, oh, I don't know if I can be in public with
Yeah.
you. And I'm like, girl, you can't be gay until graduation if you're in love with her. That's like, it's so much more than that.
You're at
I needed it to
Oberlin.
be.
That's what I kept thinking. I'm like, you're
Yeah,
at OB.
like,
You're okay. Like
That part,
if
that's
ever
part.
there was a place,
Yeah.
it was okay.
It is a
It's here.
safe space. Like the whole campus
You're
is a safe
good.
space. That was the only sort of like sometimes there are details that don't quite work. Even though it was the early '90s, it was still like you could hold this girl's hand in public. First of all, no one's going to think anything about it because in Oberlin, that's like probably the least strange thing you're going to see on your walk through the quad. But
Would you have wanted to see Jam's POV in the book, or you would have liked it as just like that was one thing we don't have access to?
No, yeah, I thought she was fascinating, but there were already so many people we were getting. And for me, it was about the lineage of the story. That would have taken me out. Even Aubrey's mother, who I loved, I think that would have been a very different angle all of a sudden to go on. Yeah?
And I think we knew some things about Jam, but really, right? Like, I don't think she was going to tell us much about Iris that we weren't getting from Iris
Right.
or Melody. Or
That's
Aubrey.
true. That's
Yeah.
very true.
And also, I think it would have just disrupted what the project of the book was, which was
Right.
to look at a family.
Yeah.
Right,
And
absolutely.
the family tree and the ways in which the branches intertwine. And so bringing in Jam's perspective, as much as I think we all want it just for the sake of prurience and like
Yeah.
nosiness. I'm nosy.
Yeah, no.
I want to know
sure.
everything about everyone
Yeah.
for all time. And so I think that's why she just didn't go there. And that's all we see of Jam. And then we move on and so much is left unresolved. We don't even know if Iris, hits the beaver trail of her again.
Can I ask y'all something? A craft question that I was really curious about. So we get to like chapter 18 at 176, and everyone gets a first person.
Yeah.
Well, and by everyone, the women get a first person. And then we
'Cause the
sneak
men
back
are all
out.
dead.
The men are dead.
Damn.
But then we leave again. And you're taught to read the novel that the I is always Melody. And then all of a sudden it's not. Now it's Save. What did that do
I had to remain open. Like, I think when I read books by Black writers that are trying to do the intergenerational conflict, it just seems like past, present, you tend to collapse in a way. So I had to keep reminding myself, like, read some pages before and some pages after and say, okay, who is talking? Where are we at? I had to do that multiple times, but that's what we talked about, Jackie, sort of trust the reader to be able to follow along without making too sharp of like, here's where we're going next. But yeah, I especially when it comes to Black writers writing about ancestors and all of that, I have to keep myself so open. I have to keep double and triple checking of where I am in space, you know, with these characters.
I think the first person chapters and those shift even within chapters, it was a really striking reminder to me of like, this is also my life story for every other character. Like, it's not just Melody's story.
Absolutely.
It's not just Iris's story. Like, Sabe has a life story.
Sure.
Po' Boy has a life story. And so it's like, oh, of course we think this way about this character because we're hearing about them in the third person from someone else's point of view or from the narrator point of view. But like, this character also lived a life and like deserves their own telling of their own story, which I think is like really, like, oh shit, right, of course.
Yeah. And I think it was a way of just bringing everything to a conclusion that everyone gets to speak for themselves in the end.
Yeah. Good
And
point.
I thought that the
it
intimacy
was a good
of it,
choice. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
the closest we get to these characters is when there's only a few pages left.
Yes.
And they're like, now I gave you everything I had to give you. Like, you go on.
It's really surprising in some ways that she did that we get so much. We learned so many crucial details in the last 15 pages.
Yeah.
And I kept thinking, that's
Brave.
some bold ass shit right there. Like, you know what? I'm just gonna drop a bomb right here. Good luck and good night. We're done.
And a lot of voice work.
Yes.
Because for me, reading those 3 chapters, I'm like, this is a very different I than what we have been told. So for her to drop into that voice so intimately, as soon as she's talking about Dunbar, I'm like, this has to be Sabe. This has to be this character. And she's just trusting that you know that I, but she does so much lifting to be like, here's the different register of these 3 women so that I don't have to say their name and you know who they are. Like, to do that at the end, once we've already learned the pattern of the book, it's kind of wild.
It is. She's like, you know what? I'm gonna do something completely different now.
Yeah.
Sorry, but not sorry.
And figure it out and keep going, because you got 10 pages left.
Yeah.
Yeah, what are you gonna do, quit now?
You can't quit yet,
I
right?
dare you.
So come this far, what's up?
There was a lot of real sly stuff throughout the novel, and also these like truly sharp and funny moments. Like, there's a page, and I underlined it because she talks about Raymond Carver, who is so valorized in so many colleges, and she said Carver's staccato sentences bothered her. They felt like something she could have written in 7th grade, but every white person in her class seemed to be in love. I just fell out when I read that, and I was laughing and laughing, and my partner was like, "What's so funny?" And I showed her, and she was like, "I don't," and I was like, and she has this other beautiful line, and there were 2 lines I underlined in the book, and that was one of them. The other one was, she felt red at the bone, like there was something inside of her undone and bleeding. And that was Iris talking about Jam, but really it speaks to everyone in the novel, and that they all have these open wounds that are healed in many ways by the love of the people around them. And just that she could balance wit and sharpness with ambition and tenderness really impressed me.
I had a little bit of difficulty connecting what happened with Sabe and the Tulsa riots with Iris, because I know that, you know, trauma, it can lead over into many different areas of your life. But I was like, I know this happened, there was so much destruction, but why does Iris have to be sort of the scapegoat for all of that? But then again, I'm like, well, maybe you don't really have a choice, you know, when you direct that pain towards, and that's her child, you know, that's her legacy. But it was hard for me, I don't know, maybe on an emotional level, like, well, I don't see the connect, I don't understand.
Can you tell me more about how you see the idea of her carrying the brunt?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think just even in the first chapter, where it's just like, oh, like we're talking about, we're skipping generations. And when she's talking about ambition and dreams, I'm like, okay, so she probably had all of these dreams. It's making inferences. Like, she probably had all these dreams for Iris, and they all went away, or they're going to be passed on to Melody. But I was like, why? How does that connect to what happened in Tulsa? Maybe because maybe because of the destruction of all they built there, even though they moved to New York and started anew. I'm not sure.
I think if there's a connection there, it's that sometimes you have to start over. Sometimes the life you've built for yourself is destroyed by forces beyond your control. And in one, it's the forces of racism and destruction. And there's this moment where she says it wasn't a riot, it was a massacre. And then in her own life, with her daughter getting pregnant at 15, I think it becomes another moment where it's not just a riot, it's a massacre. And she has to pick up their family. And they moved to Park Slope before Park Slope was Park Slope.
I know, I was like, whoa.
And yeah, Anna Brownstone.
I was like, excuse
Get
me?
it?
Like, right. Right. I was like, all right. But the disappointment that Sabe had when she finds out that Iris is pregnant, man, that was palpable.
She
She's
hit
like,
her, right?
no.
Yeah, she did.
Because that almost felt like the bridge that you're like, well, if she doesn't cross this bridge, it's a different kind of disappointment. And then she's curled up on the ground and being struck by her mother and go, oh, there's more, and it's more visceral and more difficult than I maybe knew.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. I thought I really enjoyed most of the book, but there were some issues. And one of the issues was that oftentimes some of the character decisions and choices felt unearned. And like, why was Sabe so disproportionately upset? I mean, I know it's upsetting when your 15-year-old is pregnant, but at the same time, like some of her reactions seemed outsized. And some of the time, it didn't seem like that was the early 90s. It felt like it was set in the 60s. And there is that disjointed understanding of time throughout the novel. Part of it is, I think, because Woodson is using some deliberately I don't want to say old-fashioned, but some prose that makes it seem like it's an early 20th century novel, but it's actually contemporary. And so I just think to contemporary sensibilities, yeah, your daughter's pregnant, it's unfortunate, and then you move on. And so why was she so wildly upset about it? And it's never explored, it's never explained. We don't learn, like maybe she was once pregnant at 15.
Yeah.
There's just no backstory there.
I wonder if the Catholicism was supposed to be doing some of that
Yeah.
like lifting of it's the religion here and like the disappointment that this creates for us because of what we raised you to be. But then we see that moment in the Catholic school where she's like, nah, you're not gonna come for my kid like this.
That's what I was saying. It
And that's the thing, it's inconsistent.
Right, that I was saying, yeah, because I was like, I know the Catholicism played a part, but it wasn't as that pervasive where I was mindful of it. And anytime
Where
it was
you
talking
knew,
about
like, oh, this
pregnancy
is gonna be-
or sex or anything, yeah.
And it also feels like that doesn't quite mesh with the decision to like invite the child's father to live in your home. Like that feels like a very like if your community centers around your your very conservative church, that feels like maybe an out of step move. But I guess that is after they moved to Park Slope.
But also, they don't let them sleep in the same room.
Yep, that's
which I
true.
thought
Yep,
was
that's true.
hilarious.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, all right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's too late now. Like, I mean,
She was
I thought
pregnant,
that
right?
was
yeah,
so
like, so
funny.
what?
The ship has sailed. What's so funny is it reminded me of my parents who are
The ship
Catholic.
in a bottle, really.
And they're kind of conservative. And to this day, if you're not married, you cannot share a bedroom in their house with a partner.
Oh,
And I'm
man.
like, I'm 44. It
doesn't matter.
Really?
Oh, yeah, it's like,
Oh no, she can sleep over there. So what kinds of things we've talked a lot about what we loved. What kinds of things didn't work for you in the book? Or was there anything that didn't work for you in the book?
I think there was a lot that brought up questions, and I was just like, maybe I'm not reading this right, or like maybe I'm not seeing it. I thought the juxtaposition of like Tulsa and 9/11.
Yes.
And we get it often, right? The fire and the
Yes.
smoke. And then we have Iris dreaming of fire and smoke. And then we have that moment that we learn about 9/11. And to me, it didn't seem like it was trying to maybe draw a one-to-one correlation, but I wasn't sure I could see how it works, right? Because one of this
I
was
was
very
trying
racially
so hard.
driven, was very much like an American like thing.
this was a nationalist thing, and then I'm like, okay, you have all black towns,
Yeah.
invasion, but it's
And the
not
way
a
that
direct
money and
parallel.
wealth is happening in that
Yeah,
moment.
but it wasn't a direct parallel. So I was trying to make all of these connections in my head, but I'm like, I just wish the connection was a little bit clearer. Yeah. But
And also the wealth. Where did Iris and Po' Boy's wealth come from? It's never explained.
And we hear them scrimping. So I thought
Yes.
she inherited the gold, right? Sabe inherits that.
okay.
Oh, I thought she kept converting her scrimps into gold.
I thought it was like that, like previous generations, when they moved to Chicago, they took some, the people, because they had a store.
I didn't
get
know.
that.
Maybe I'm making this
I
up.
think some of it was from Chicago, like
Yeah.
after.
Because
'cause it felt
Sabe's
like-
mother tells her,
Yeah.
like, convert anything you have into gold. So I'm assuming that they had that tradition.
And it feels like everything that was in response to everything being wiped out
Yeah.
in Tulsa.
Yeah.
Yes, because of the aunt's beauty
The
parlor.
beauty parlor, and
Yeah.
then one of them had a restaurant. Is there a restaurant?
And the businesses just flew up, and so gold was this one thing.
Was the thing they
that
had.
was immutable.
Right,
And
absolutely.
Yeah.
yet I just kept wondering, where is all their
Yeah.
money coming from?
That's
How
the
are they
one-
continuing
Yeah.
to accumulate it? We never learn what they really do for a living.
Yeah.
And they spend it on a house, but there are also moments where it sounds like they were scrimping, and I'm like, well, you got a bar right there. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah,
let's
and they
take
imply
that.
that there's a class difference between Aubrey
That's what-
and
Right.
Iris,
Yeah.
and yet they own a Park Slope brownstone. They are going to Cotillion. You have to have money to do these things,
Right.
And so, but they're scrimping, and so it's just
Yeah.
like,
I wasn't sure either because I was able to pick up on the difference in socioeconomic classes through Aubrey's perspective. He's talking about the roaches and the
Yeah,
floors and
sure.
all that. But then I was like, well, then how does Iris's family have money? Like I'm told of all the material things, but I wasn't exactly sure like how they keeping this afloat.
And they mentioned Po Boy's job, right? He was like an accountant.
yes,
Which doesn't seem necessarily like the kind of job that like you can
Like, not-
accumulate that kind of like intergenerational
Yeah, I was like,
wealth.
But I'm thinking when he got straight out of college,
Yeah.
when when Po Boy and Sabe left school, to both be highly educated
Yeah.
in the workforce from the time of 22.
True.
I don't know anything about economics in the 1960s or
Don't
70s,
I?
but
Or I don't know
Hey.
anything about economics in the 2019s. So like you're well ahead of me.
I don't know. Yeah, I'm like, yeah.
there were a lot of unanswered questions that I think you either have to just find something to hold on to or make leaps.
yes. And I don't mind making leaps, but
Yes.
sometimes I just felt like, whew, that's a bridge too far.
Yeah, you just wanted to ground it.
Yeah, just a little more substance, not even substance, a little more information.
I even think with the death, Aubrey's death, like I was kind of like, whoa. Like, you know, you said dropping, I don't want to say dropping bombs in this context, but like, you know, all of these mic drops and 15 pages in, but even with his death, I was like, whoa.
came out of
I was like,
nowhere.
wow. I had to
I
read
had
it.
to reread it. I was
I
like,
was
no,
like,
you didn't kill him.
No, I was like, yeah, I was like,
I
wait
had
a
to go
minute.
back and read it after I finished the book because I just thought maybe I misunderstood.
And I was like,
my dad, my dad, my dad.
Yeah.
And then I just thought, no, there's no way she would make Aubrey die in 9/11
Yeah.
because it starts in 2001.
And I was like,
that's too convenient.
I know
She
that's
says we became one child, and then it's just that list of like
Yeah, at first
dads.
I was
and I'm
like-
like, wait, is the one child you? Like,
I
is
know,
this the-
yeah. Because at first I was like, I know this ain't 9/11. And then I stopped and then I went back and I was like, wait, this is, oh man.
Which I thought was dope to be like, you know, we often think that only like white privileged people
Yes.
died in 9/11.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, what about this side that we don't see? That also there was a rupture in the city around Black and brown folks who worked in that area and had these service jobs that we never talk about. But it was so unexpected.
I was
It
very unexpected.
Very jarring. Because I feel like that's such a an evocative choice and like a different way than recalling like the massacre in Tulsa of something that maybe a lot of the readers probably haven't lived through, and it's such like this. It's a different kind of bleak historical moment, and like someone dying in the September 11th attack feels like a narrative choice that I've like seen made before. And I agree that it's like you're not talking about like a white executive, you're talking about a Black mailroom employee. And so there's a different valence to it. But I still it felt so abrupt and like, oh, now I'm thinking about this. And maybe it's because like the first responder bill has been in the news lately.
Yeah.
It almost felt too contemporary, where I feel like it brought me out of the story. And I think Melody and I are like exactly the same age because I had the exact same experience. So that part brought me too close to my own life. The idea of families having to uproot because of trauma is like a lot of what I learned as a Jewish kid, right? There's like, that's a history that was very familiar to me,
Yeah.
but I still didn't feel like, oh, I'm here in my own shoes in my apartment thinking about my life.
Yeah, it was so jarring, and I kept trying to understand. And I agree, Elizabeth. Like, I loved the idea of acknowledging that it wasn't just the investment bankers that died, and those are the people that got a lot of the attention and the huge settlements from the 9/11 fund. while the people who actually needed that money and support, I think that everyone did, but the people who probably needed it in different ways and probably in larger amounts were the service workers and the Black and brown people in those buildings, and they rarely got any shine. And so knowing that, it was great that she included it, but then knowing that you should have done more and like just given us a little stronger sense, because I really had to go back and make sure, like, wait, did Aubrey really die?
Yeah, that was my reaction.
And that moment with Iris where she like runs out of the apartment and she runs down to 9/11 and is just like, I wish I had been different towards Aubrey. Like that solidified it in some ways. I wish we had gotten the smoke and fire earlier from him to have prepped that moment.
Yeah.
Because everyone else has a like smoke and fire story to kind of solidify that this is coming. And that might have been a way in to seeing his death.
Yeah, I think that was the only thing where I was like, it was a little bit too jarring for me. Yeah.
That for me, that was the one moment that I had questions about, and loved that scene.
Oh no, I
with
did.
the children all watching it, like
Yeah.
love that moment. But it's just like,
yeah.
I love Aubrey. Like you can't take him from me in this way. Like I'm so invested in this character.
Right.
And it was poignant to see all the children, because I think whether you lived in New York or not, for all of us who were sentient at that time, like not like 4 or 5 or 6 or younger, like I remember where I was. I was in Lincoln, Nebraska when the planes hit, in my apartment, and the woman I was dating at the time called me and said, turn on the TV, because she knew I was not a morning person. And like I remember every detail about that morning, and then how everything stopped. Nobody went to work that day. Everyone stayed home and watched TV. And I remember like 3 a.m. realizing, oh my God, I have been watching this coverage all day long. And I can only imagine what New Yorkers were experiencing.
It was
and
wild.
so it was interesting to read that and see what the children were thinking and what they were witnessing.
And it
being
felt
so
very
close to
honest.
It did.
Like I remember being in 8th grade.
Born and raised in New York?
Yeah, in 8th grade, and like there's an emergency situation. We're calling everybody's parents, and like my teacher's in the corner crying, and we didn't really know what had happened yet, but it felt like this moment of like, oh wait, like going through your Rolodex as a kid, like do I know anybody in that area? And the streets were empty. Just completely empty. There was no one really outside. It was just like everyone was trying to figure out, what is this? And I think you get that kind of huge question in this book where the kids are like, wait, what is going on?
Even the questioning between when the first and second towers fell of like, could this be a mistake? And like, oh no, this is like a different kind of tragedy is present, which that's my like most visceral memory of it, in being in school, being like, oh, what a weird, horrible tragedy. And then like, oh no, it's different.
Yeah.
That was really well observed, I thought. Like I felt it in the book, like, oh yeah, that
And it was so
remember.
authentic to like how we were all so confused, because it was the Twin Towers. I spent a lot of time in New York growing up because I have a lot of family here. And the Twin Towers were always this emblem of just solidity and steel. And there was no way that those buildings could burn. Steel doesn't burn, or so we thought. But then, no
so
one
the
ever
documentaries
imagined
say.
that you fly an airplane into a building, and so it just was really it brought back a lot. I thought it was interesting the way that worked, and the way that no matter where you were in this country, or quite frankly in the world, everybody has some sort of memory from that day. And so she gave us that entry point.
Do we want to talk about the end?
The end, yes. I wasn't crazy about the ending.
Yeah.
I just wasn't crazy about the ending. It felt like there was 100 pages missing.
And I was like, what? It's gone. It's over.
Did you see those 100 pages as chronologically happening after the ending or before?
No, before. I think it's just
yeah.
100 pages missing from in the middle of the book. So to get to this place where
We're at the gleaning.
we end, and it's just like, haha, we found the gold. And I wanted to feel more at that moment. I wanted to feel so excited, because this is life-changing amounts of money. Like Melody and Iris are never gonna have to worry ever again. Like this is generational wealth right here. And throughout the novel, Sabe makes it seem like she's got a whole lot of gold in those floorboards. And so I was really excited, but I couldn't really feel excited because I just thought, wait, this is it?
I didn't doubt that the gold would be there. So it was like, you don't get that satisfaction of like, oh, is it going to be enough for them? I felt like the great pains were taken to show how hard they worked, how hard the grandparents worked to save that gold, and how she felt it in the steps even when she was a little kid. So I didn't feel a lot of suspense in that moment.
And then she tried to imply suspense, like no matter what happens, we're gonna be okay. But like, girl, we know the gold's there. Like we read the whole book.
I wanted doubt from Iris, I think.
Yeah.
Because I kind of knew that Melody knew. Like she had observed so early on, but I could see Iris being like, nah, like my parents were always talking or always, you know, acting like something was there, and maybe some tension in that moment. I just think the image is beautiful.
I find it.
The language at the end, I'm like, the word gleamy is such a good word.
And it is a really satisfying payoff of like all the hard work done to pass on not just the trauma from generation to generation, but the joy and the prosperity and how hard that can be, and how one thing kind of gets done almost inadvertently, like you pass on the ways that you've screwed up to your kids just by like in these like brief moments of like fear or anger. And then this took so much build for so many generations after having it wiped out through just the horrible racist massacre, and then to rebuild that, it's like a very beautiful moment, but but it came so quickly, right? There's the sentences didn't feel or too ornate, but everything was just so loaded with feeling, which I loved. My favorite part of the reading experience was the book is less than 200 pages, but you just like, it is just so many different feelings, and you just cut to like, there's so many just like intimate moment of people in bed, intimate moment of people having like the fight that defines their relationship, and it didn't feel jumpy or jarring. It just felt like, oh, it cuts the fat. Everything that you need to know, or almost everything, it's all there, and it was done so efficiently.
And as lean as the prose was, still the descriptions were lush. I was blown away. At a language level and a sentence level, this novel blew me away. I had some issues with the plot and the character, not the plot, but just sort of the thickness. But whew, it was just so beautiful. Like I just felt like, oh, I just want to eat this forever. It was stunningly written.
For such few words, I could see every character. Like I think I could draw, because it was, you got just enough to know, okay, this person's light skinned and short, this person, like, you know how they look, how they move. And it's not a lot of like words that she's giving to that. The economy of language.
I felt like I could write the screenplay just from reading this and visualize it and come up with a mood board and absolutely know what everything would look like. I'm sure she'll want to write her own screenplay, and I hope she does, because this would make an amazing movie.
Yeah, I love the scene of when they spread Aubrey's mother's ashes out in the ocean. She didn't use a lot of words from that one, but you feel like you can taste the salt, you can hear the seagulls in the background. It was beautiful.
And at that moment, Aubrey and Iris are already kind of beefing. But to be like, well, we can come together for this.
He's like, come on, let's do this. And I'm like, oh.
And we've just started to understand what Aubrey's mother meant to Iris and what she did for Iris. And so it makes her passing all the more bittersweet. And we see so much death in this book. There's a surprising amount of death in this book.
The little brother.
For it not being a dark book.
A lot of people died. All the guys, like, really quick.
I'm sorry, but men just
did not make it.
You in danger, girl.
I feel like I'm gonna die at the end of this book club, just to put a pin in it.
Gosh, you are spoiling how
Sorry.
I did.
Sorry.
But no, I thought that was. I was thinking about it.
I'll tell you, we would go super viral.
I think we would. It'd be like, dun, dun, dun. Well, before we come to an end, I would love to know what kinds of things are you guys working on, and what kinds of projects do you want to give a shout out to that in your lives?
So I just submitted my second book.
Hey.
So I had to do field work in Oklahoma. So I'm talking about the Great Migration and using personal history to make this connective tissue across the country. So when I read about the Tulsa riots in here, I was like, yep, talk about this Black history, well, American history that a lot of people still aren't privy to. So that's what I'm finished up.
What's the title of your forthcoming book?
Oh, it's still, in the works there.
Flux?
In Flux, yep. But that might be a good title, In Flux. Right, people taking flight. That might be a good one.
Elizabeth, what do you have going on?
So my third novel comes out next May. It's called Clap When You Land.
Yeah.
It's the story of two sisters who don't know about each other. Their father had a secret family. Depending on what side you're on, you figure out who was the secret. And their father dies in a plane crash. And so it's set on 2001, a plane that fell in Queens on its way to the Dominican Republic.
Wow.
And just all of the stories that came up of who inherits and who's considered legitimate and what does it mean to lose on such a large scale, but gain a whole person and family. And it's in verse through both perspectives.
Nice.
Wow. What are you up to, Josh?
I have an essay collection called Nice Try, Stories of Best Intentions and Mixed Results, coming out on the same day as Red at the Bone. So yeah, if you want kind of the opposite book, a silly, long-winded book where nothing that serious happens, which is not a good sales pitch, but it's very fun and
I know. It's gonna kill you.
Yeah, she's not here. No, it is a very different, I think, reading experience, which I saw the date and I was like, oh, we're not competing.
No, different lanes.
But
different lanes.
it's kind of it's personal essays, and it's just like about kind of what it means to be good and kind in this era is something that I think about a lot. And then it's like, you know, stories about how I used to teach preschool and trying to do drugs in a bowling alley bathroom, and those are different stories.
Okay,
That's not, yeah.
okay,
I
okay.
wasn't like, come on, kids, yeah, I'm gonna teach about life. Working on as a writer and supervising producer for Desus Mero on Showtime.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, woo! I love it. What kinds of things have you guys been reading lately that you loved?
I just finished Angie Cruz's novel, Dominicana.
So did I.
Oh, I can't wait to read that one. It's on my list, and I'm
So did
really
I.
looking forward to it.
I mean, just has been around for so long, and I think takes so much time with her books. And when she puts something out, you know, like you spent time with these characters. And for me, I'm always looking for Dominican writers, and I think she just doesn't always get her just dues. But it's a gorgeous novel, and it comes out September 3rd. So pick it up.
Excellent. What about you?
I just read Kristen Arnett's novel, Mostly Dead Things, which I also loved. It's like real bleak and really contemporary, and there's like a real like struggle for warmth between the characters that demonstrates like such a warmth from the author that I really loved.
I am reading All This Could Be Yours by Jamie Attenberg.
Yay.
And so far, it's really wonderful. And I, too, just finished Mostly Dead Things, which I also love.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm reading Three Women by Lisa Tadeo.
I hated that book. I'm
Really?
sorry. I
Really?
fucking hated it. Just, I can't keep it in.
I
Like,
just started it. So on the way here.
Shit
So
is a mess.
why didn't you like it? Because of the character?
First of all, it's three white women. Nothing wrong with that, but just call it three white women.
Oh, okay.
Like, what are we doing?
I
And
thought
then
she-
there's no analysis. She writes all about their sex lives, and it's interesting, like to read about women's desires
Right.
and see all
That's
this
why I
stuff
picked it up.
happening. It's definitely interesting, and I think it's important for more women's desires to be talked about in
Right.
this way.
Right.
But at the end, that's it. She's just like, and that's it.
This is the book club.
Shit
We
is
gotta
wild.
talk
I
about
know.
this
I was
one
like,
next.
wait a minute. I know.
Look, I will eviscerate it. And then what's so funny is I post all my I post on Goodreads, but
Right.
I use Goodreeds as a reader, and writers should not go and
Yeah,
look at
yeah,
my
yeah.
Goodreads
Right.
reviews. If I truly don't respect a book, I actually don't post it to Goodreads anymore because it becomes a thing.
Right.
But I'm not gonna lie and pretend. I'm not gonna pretend. And so many people have been like defending the book to me, and I'm like,
No,
not what this
it's
is.
a
That's not what it's about.
bestseller.
Yeah.
It's totally
Right.
gonna do fine.
Right,
Like
you
we
didn't
don't, and I would never pick on a
destroy
book
it.
that wasn't like already doing extraordinarily well.
Right.
'Cause
Absolutely.
it's just so hard to sell books. But like she's selling tons and tons
Yeah.
of books. It's gonna be totally fine. So do you guys have questions for Jackie?
I would love to know, like, what are the chapters we didn't get? There's so many characters I want to
Yes.
know more about, and I wonder if, like, Jackie cut anything. Like, could we get a lost tapes or like something, the secret files of? Because I think the book is so slim and so efficient, and I imagine there was probably a lot of writing that was done to get it this clean. And I just don't want to leave these characters yet. So I would love to be like, Jackie, what was the editorial process, and like, are we ever going to see the secret chapters?
I would ask her if Iris ever has another relationship with a woman and
Yeah.
who she hooked up with now in the present day. Because I'm nosy.
Yeah.
I want to know more about Malcolm. I really just
Malcolm needs
whatever.
a book.
I just like
Yes.
whatever happened to him, like all of that, you know.
Yeah.
I'm really curious about just on a technical level why this book was pitched adult fiction as opposed to young adult, because her and I mean that as a credit to the like breadth and depth of young adult fiction and Jackie Woodson's previous wonderful young adult fiction, and like why this was the one that she decided to go adult with, because especially it deals so much with like the interior lives of teenagers. So I was like very curious about that.
Also, does Melody ever have sex? And is it good?
Yes.
Yeah. I loved that like Iris had good sex. Right?
I did too, and that she loved it.
And
that
that
she
she
didn't
loved it.
apologize for it.
Right.
And
Like
that
she was
it-
just like, I get down.
Yeah, it was like if he had asked me, I would have told him. And I'm like,
Yeah.
this is an amazing perspective we often don't think about and don't think about teens having, or like that there is joy and pleasure in that. I thought that was so brave in some ways.
And you get the inverse experience with Aubrey's first experience with her, where he was like, it felt weird and I was happy, but like it wasn't, you know, I wanted to talk to her and felt too.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask. Yeah, like he could tell that it was his first time, and he was really insecure about it, and feeling all kinds of feelings. And it was lovely to see that kind of tenderness in a man.
Yeah.
Tender, like when you said tender earlier, it's exactly that.
Right,
Like
right.
he wanted to, and he never wanted to leave her side again. Like he imprinted on her. That's from I read trash, and so it was really moving to just see that and to see something different in terms of teen male sexuality.
Yeah. Love that.
And then there was this moment when Po Boy was holding Melody, and he talked about the 5-year-old sweat and the sweetness of her, and
She's
how
on
he
his-
wanted to inhale that smell forever and never let her go.
Yeah.
And so that the men in this novel allowed themselves to be vulnerable and allowed themselves to love, and that they weren't these damaged. Oftentimes we just see damaged men in fiction, and I get why. But it was really great to see human men, human, like good and bad, but just truly human and able to be tender.
Right.
Oh, any other questions for Jackie?
That's it.
Yeah, right. I can ask anything.
Yeah.
Anything at all. I wonder if she'll answer our
Yeah.
questions. I think she might.
I wonder like just how she gets so much heart into so little. I feel like I have to write so many words before I get to like, oh, that was an emotion.
Yes.
And just the compactness of it, and it's not terse, it's just like fleeting, but it sticks with you.
I would love to know about Melody as a parent, if Melody becomes a parent, because we learn so much about the other mothers.
Yep.
Like, who does she draw from? Or how does she
Yes.
reinvent perceptions of motherhood based off of where she is in time and space?
Right.
I would love to know more about Aubrey's mother. Like, tell us more about Aubrey's mother and how she came to be so interesting and so wise and such a good mother. And clearly she struggled with depression.
Yeah.
And I also appreciated that portrayal of,
Yes.
of depression and single parenthood, and still loving Aubrey and giving him a clear sense of self in the world. And so I would just love to know more about like what's going on with her. Here's the beautiful books. Cheers.
Cheers.
Years.
Yeah.
90s hip hop.
90s hip hop.
I think Jackie and I are the same age. Because all the musical references, I was like, yeah, that's my jam. That's right.
Also 2001's hip hop,
Yeah.
because that was my jam. That's Cha-Cha Slide.
It's cute. It's such a specific choice, not to be too plotty, that Prince factors into the
Yes.
first chapter. Because it's,
And then she wanted to listen to Darling Nikki for Capitola. And nobody said anything. I was like, Darling Nikki is a filthy song.
Yeah.
Well, they didn't let her say the words.
My mom wouldn't let us listen to Darling Nikki when I was growing up. And so I would always find ways to sneak it because I was like, I don't know what's going on. And I didn't understand the words at all.
Yeah.
But I understood them. And I was like, and I would sing along and she'd be like, stop singing that. I know it's good if I can't sing it.
I love it.